The air in the chamber smelled like something between a hospital and a lightning storm. Wrong gravity pulled at my shoulders just enough to remind me that I was nowhere close to home. I was standing in the upper observation ring of the Galactic Council's grand convocation hall, the only human in a room built for 600 delegates from 41 recognized civilizations. My boots were the loudest thing in the room, and I had not moved in 11 minutes. Below me, the session was in its final hour. I had been sent as a witness, not a participant, not a speaker. The briefing documents had made that distinction 3 times, and I had counted each one. My name is Yara Vasquez. At 34 I held the rank of commander in the Earth Diplomatic Defense Corps, which was a polite name for the branch of our military that had been trained to smile. In rooms like this one, I spoke 6 languages, 4 of them were human. I had spent 6 years in deep space, liaison postings, eating food that tasted like pressed cardboard, sleeping in gravity wells that bent my spine sideways, learning to read the body language of species that communicated through color shifts in subsonic hum. I was qualified, I was prepared. None of that mattered today. Today, the Galactic Council was voting on humanity's taxonomic classification under the Interstellar Sentience Accord, a framework they called it protection mechanism. Every civilization above Tier 3 received legal personhood, autonomous territorial rights, and protection from commercial exploitation. Earth had applied for Tier 3 recognition 4 years ago. The review had taken 3 and 2 years, longer than any comparable case in Council history. I had my hands folded in front of me. I kept looking at them. The knuckle on my right index finger had a small raised scar from a childhood fall off a chain-link fence in El Paso when I was 9 years old. My left index finger had a different scar, smaller, cleaner, from my brother Diego's pocket knife. He had been teaching me how to whittle. I was terrible at it. He had laughed so hard. He dropped the knife, and somehow I was the one who got cut. He gave me the knife the morning before the Kepler displacement. I kept looking at my hands. Below me, Delegate Morin of the Solon Compact was finishing a speech about developmental benchmarks and cognitive ceiling thresholds. His species communicated primarily through bioluminescent patterns along their torso, but the translation earpiece in my ear rendered his words in flat, precise English. He had been speaking for 40 minutes. His central argument was that humanity's neurological architecture, while impressive for a Class E biosphere species, demonstrated what he called reactive intelligence rather than generative sapience. The distinction, he explained, was critical. Reactive intelligence meant we were good at solving problems put in front of us. Generative sapience meant we could create problems worth solving. In his framework, only the latter qualified a species for full legal recognition. I had written 3 doctoral level rebuttals to this exact argument in the past 2 years. None of them had been entered into the official record. Witnesses do not submit documents. Witnesses observe. I kept my hands folded. The vote came without fanfare, no dramatic pause, no long silence. Delegate after delegate registered their position through the chambers. Biological interface, a touch of fin to panel, a color pulse toward a sensor. Directed sound burst into a receiver, 41. Civilizations. The count ran on a display above the central floor. The resolution passed with 37 votes. Favor. Humanity was formally classified under Taxonomic Tier 4 conditional. Sapiens. Tier 4 meant smart enough to be useful, not smart enough to have rights. Tier 4 meant that the harvest licensing framework, the commercial exploitation treaty that 3 separate human advocacy groups had been fighting in council courts for 9 years, was now legally applicable to human labor, human biological material, and human territorial resources. It meant Diego had not been an accident. It meant Diego had been a preview. I did not move. I stood in the observation ring, and I breathed the wrong air, and I looked at my hands, and I kept very, very still, the way my abuela had taught me to be still when something in the room wanted to see you. Break. The Vethkai delegate rose to deliver the formal classification statement. His name was Pryathvas. 7 ft tall, deep violet coloring along his neck ridges. The kind of physical presence that his species had spent 3,000 years using to end conversations before they started. He was the one who had drafted the Tier 4 resolution. I had read his name on the document so many times it had stopped feeling like a name and started feeling like a noise. He spoke in Old Gallic. Old Gallic was the ceremonial diplomatic language of the council's founding species. It was not taught to non-council members. It was not officially recognized as a language. Humans were expected to know. The council operated on the quiet understanding that certain conversations could happen in that room without translation because no one in the observation rings would understand a word. I had been studying Old Gallic for 6 years. Pryathvas said, in the language he believed was private, the animals are formally catalogued. We may proceed with the harvest licensing review. The delegate beside him, a pale aquatic species from the Vea Shoals, made a sound that the translation matrix did not catch. A private sound, a sound between colleagues who had just finished a long and tedious piece of administrative work. I looked at my hands, the knuckles, the calluses along the base of my fingers from years of climbing and gripping and working. The 2 scars. I thought about Diego, 22 years old, dark eyes, bad jokes, and a laugh that made strangers turn around in restaurants just to see who was having that much fun. He had been assigned to the Kepler Station Support Crew under the Council's Humanitarian Development Initiative, which was the other polite name for the labor program that moved human workers into Council space infrastructure projects. The initiative's documents had described his posting as voluntary. I had held those documents. The word voluntary appeared 14 times. I kept my hands folded, and I did not translate the delegate's words for the official record, and I stood in that wrong gravity room breathing wrong smelling air until the session was formally closed and the chamber lights shifted from ceremonial gold to standard white. Then I walked out. The corridor outside was long and curved, and the floor was a material that absorbed sound so completely that my footsteps disappeared the moment they left my boots. I walked the whole length of it without making a single sound in the world. I thought about the word they had used. Animals. I turned it over the way you turn over a stone to see what is living underneath it. My abuela had a saying she used when men With power said stupid things with confidence, she would listen to them. Finish, she would nod, then she would say very quietly in the voice she used for both prayer and for serious business, bless their hearts. It was the most dangerous sentence she knew. I walked to the end of the corridor. I pulled out my personal comm unit. I sent one message to the Earth Defense Corps Joint Command, 14 words, no punctuation, no explanation. It said they passed Tier 4. Unanimous, proceed with withdrawal plan. On my mark. Then I put the comm unit away. I stood at the end of that soundless corridor in a building on a station, orbiting a star that was not my sun, and I looked down at my hands one more time. The scar from Diego's knife. The scar from that chain-link fence in El Paso. Both of them earned, both of them mine. Bless their hearts. The withdrawal did not look like withdrawal. That was the point. It looked like scheduling conflicts, administrative delays, contract renegotiations that had been, regrettably, pending for some time. It looked like the entirely ordinary friction of interstellar logistics, the kind of thing that happened all the time when you were coordinating labor across 14 star systems and communication. Delays ran anywhere from 4 hours to 3 days depending on relay positioning. The Council did not notice for 11 days. I was on board the deep-range transport carrier INS Calvary when the first internal reports started circulating through the Council's administrative network, which I had access to through monitoring arrangement that was technically legal and practically invisible. I was sitting at a small desk in my assigned quarters, drinking actual coffee, real coffee, beans grown in Karnataka, ground that morning, brewed in a small press I carried everywhere, and reading the reports with the attention of someone who had been waiting for them. The Karanath shipyard had experienced an unexpected suspension of structural welding operations. The entire advanced frame assembly line, the one that produced the Council's long-haul cargo vessels, had gone quiet. The yard's administrative team had filed a Tier 2 maintenance incident report, the kind of paperwork generated when equipment failed. It had taken them 4 days to understand that the equipment had not failed. The equipment was fine. The humans who operated it were simply not there anymore. There were things in the galaxy that could operate a Karanath welding array. The Vethkai had the physical strength. The Solan had the visual precision. The Doreth Collective had the patience. None of them had spent 2 generations learning the particular combination of heat management, spatial intuition, and creative problem-solving that the advanced frame assembly required. The Council had built its shipyard around human hands because human hands were by a margin that no one had ever bothered to formally study. The best hands in known space for that specific work. The yard had a projected shutdown impact of 412 days on the Council's current fleet expansion program. I drank my coffee. The Mivath Agricultural Belt report came 3 days later. 17 irrigation network engineers had completed their contract rotations and not renewed. The Mivath growing season operated on a 46-day cycle that required constant recalibration of water distribution across a terrain that shifted with the local tidal patterns of 3 separate moons. The recalibration process was something that a human engineer could run from a field terminal in about 2 hours. cross-checking variables in a way that was partly mathematical and partly the engineers themselves would have told. You feel the way a good cook knows the heat of a pan without a thermometer. The council had sent automated systems to cover the gap. The automated systems were, the report noted with careful diplomatic language, performing suboptimally. 17 of the 46 growing plots were already showing stress indicators. I turned the page. The Yall Medical Station Network had lost 11 surgical specialists, human hands, and this was documented, peer-reviewed, and had appeared in 12 separate council medical research papers. Over the past 30 years, were capable of microsurgical precision that no other organic species in catalog space could match without mechanical augmentation. The combination of fine motor control, tactile sensitivity, and the human nervous system's particular feedback loop between touch and decision-making produced surgeons who could do things that machines could do better in controlled conditions, but that no machine could do well in the unpredictable, variable, constantly shifting reality of actual living bodies. The Yall stations had a wait list. It was growing. I finished my coffee, made another cup. Slower this time. My comm unit signaled an incoming secure channel request. I checked the identifier code. It was a council subdelegate frequency routed through 3 anonymizing relays, which meant someone was trying very hard to reach me without anyone else knowing they were trying to reach me. The identifier resolved to subdelegate Priathes's personal administrative office. I accepted the channel. His image appeared above my desk, rendered in the blue-tinted holographic format the council used for long-range communication. He looked smaller at this scale, and I noticed for the first time that his neck ridges, the violet ones he used to signal authority in person, had gone pale, a sign of stress in his species. I had read the equivalent of a clenched jaw, he said in Unified Galactic, the official council trade language that both of us were supposed to be speaking. Commander Vasquez, thank you for taking my communication, I said in Unified Galactic. Of course. Subdelegate. There was a pause. He was arranging words. I watched him do it. There have been some unexpected operational difficulties in several council integrated systems, he said. We are exploring the contributing factors, and it has been suggested that the recent adjustment in human labor contract rotations may be among them. I said, that sounds like a significant situation. It is developing, he said, the pause again longer this time. We believe that there may have been elements of the recent classification review that were handled with insufficient consideration of the full operational context. I let that sentence exist in the air between us for several seconds. Subdelegate, I said in Old Galactic, clear and deliberate, the language he had used in a room he thought I could not understand. My brother's name was Diego Vasquez. He was 22 years old. He was assigned to the Kepler station support crew under your humanitarian development initiative in the 3rd year of the classification review period. He arrived at Kepler station on a council transport under the supervision of council logistics personnel. He is not there anymore. He is not anywhere anymore. Priathesis was very still. I am going to need you to write his name down, I said, his full name, his age, his assignment, the date he arrived at Kepler Station, and the date that the Council's records list his status as closed. Commander, write it down, I said before we discuss anything else. Write his name down and enter it into your official administrative log for this communication. The silence that followed was different from the other silences. It had weight. It had the specific texture of a large and confident thing realizing for the first time that the room it was standing in was not the room it thought it was standing in. He wrote the name down. I watched him do it. Thank you, I said. Then I ended the call. I sat with my empty coffee cup and looked out the small viewport at the dark between stars, which was not actually dark if you knew what to look for. There were always lights out there if you looked long enough, far enough, with enough patience. My abuela had told me that once on a road trip through the Chihuahuan desert, when the car had broken down at 2:00 in the morning and I was 7 and scared, and the sky above us was the biggest thing I had ever seen. She had pointed up and said, "Your eyes just need time to adjust, Mija." The light was always there. I thought about the 17 shipyard operations managers who were going to file another round of incident reports tomorrow. I thought about the Yawl Station waitlist. I thought about what Subdelegate Priathvasis had looked like when I said Diego's name in his own language. There was a thing that needed to be understood about animals, and I was going to make sure the Galactic Council understood it before this was over. We had learned to use tools, all kinds. The Council sent its fleet on the 31st day. I will give them this: the arbitration fleet was something worth looking at. 3 carrier formations, each one built around a vessel that the Council's military architects had spent decades perfecting, long recursive hull designs that distributed impact across nonlinear stress geometries, weapons, arrays calibrated for simultaneous multi-vector engagement, communication, systems that could maintain coordination across a combat sphere 3 light minutes in diameter. The Vethkai had a word for this fleet. Rithavel. It translated roughly to the thing that ends arguments. I stood in the tactical planning room on board the INS Cavalry and looked at the fleet's approach trajectory on the main display, and I thought, they built this to fight the way they fight. That was their mistake. I had a paper map on the table in front of me, an actual paper map printed on physical paper of the Kepler transit corridor and the 3 approach vectors the fleet was most likely to use based on our projection models. I kept rolling it up and unrolling it. While I talked, my hands needed something to do. My name is Yara Vasquez, and I am the daughter of a woman who grew up in a neighborhood where the electricity went out 3 times a winter, and the granddaughter of a woman who crossed a desert on foot with 2 children and $40 and made it to the other side, and the great-granddaughter of people whose names I do not know but whose stubbornness I carry in my skeleton. We were not a family that had ever fought from a position of strength. We were a family that had fought from whatever position we were already in. The Council's military doctrine I had spent 6 months studying before any of this began was built entirely on the assumption that conflict was a declared, visible symmetrical event. You mass your force. The other side massed their forces met the larger, better equipped force. 1. The logic was clean, elegant, and had worked reliably for 2,000 years of Council military history. It worked reliably because every civilization the Council had ever fought had fought the same way. There was a reason for that. Civilizations that had reached spacefaring level in Council space had almost universally evolved from apex predators, species that had sat at the top of their planetary food chains for millions of years, that had never developed the neurological relationship with vulnerability that comes from being someone else's dinner. They fought the way predators fight, openly from strength in direct confrontation. Humans were not apex predators. We were, for most of our evolutionary history, mid-range omnivores who were slower than most things that wanted to eat us, weaker than most things that wanted to eat us, and lacking in the natural armor, venom, or sensory apparatus that other prey species had developed for survival. What we had instead was a very large brain and a very specific kind of problem. The problem was, how do you survive being hunted by something bigger and faster and stronger than you are? You do not outrun it, you do not outfight it, you learn its patterns, you learn where it goes at night, what it fears, what terrain it avoids, how far it can see, and how sharp its hearing is, and whether it tracks by scent or by motion. You build a trap, you set the trap where the predator's own confidence will walk it directly into the mechanism. You are not there when it arrives, and then you are. Every military tradition humanity had ever developed, from the earliest recorded conflicts to the deep space tactical doctrines of the 23rd century, was a variation on this one idea. Do not fight the thing in front of you. Change what is in front of you. I unrolled the paper map, smoothed it flat with both palms. The fleet's forward scout wing was 6 vessels, fast, lightly armed, designed for sensor sweeps and advanced positioning. They entered the Kepler corridor transit zone on schedule, exactly where our projections had placed them, running standard formation protocols. They did not come out the other side. No explosion, no distress signal, no wreckage on the sensor arrays of the 2 Council observation posts at the corridor's exit point. The posts logged no contacts. The corridor, according to every instrument the Council had watching it, was empty. 6 ships had gone in. Nothing had come out. The fleet's command structure spent 4 hours and 40 minutes classifying this as instrument error. I was aware of this because we had been listening to their command channel since they entered the system. 4 hours and 40 minutes. During that time, they sent diagnostic queries to both observation posts. They recalibrated their long-range sensors. Twice, they ran a full internal audit of their transit telemetry systems. They communicated with Council command at the relay station and received authorization to hold position pending assessment. They held position. They were still holding when the second event happened. The fleet's primary fuel processing node, a large, separately crewed support vessel that sat at the center of the formation, reported an unscheduled maintenance shutdown, not an attack, not an explosion, a maintenance shutdown. The kind of automated system pause that happened when onboard diagnostic software detected a parameter reading outside its operational range. The parameter in question was a very small, very specific component in the fuel processing chain, a component that had been manufactured, as it happened, by a human engineering Firm in Cape Town under a council supply contract. A component that had a particular software interface that responded to a particular update protocol that our people had built into it 3 years ago. Back when it seemed like a good idea to maintain service access to the systems we were responsible for maintaining. The fleet lost fuel processing capability for 11 hours. During those 11 hours, they could not move. I looked at my paper map. My abuela used to make a sound when things went exactly the way she planned. Not a laugh, more of a quiet exhale, the kind you make when you set down something heavy after carrying it a long way, a sound of yes. That I made that sound quietly in a room I was alone in. There was a thing I want to explain clearly because it matters. This was not cruelty. We were not doing this to cause suffering. Every operation was designed to disable, to delay, to disorient, not to destroy. There is a distinction that I held on to very carefully throughout all of it, the way you hold a tool that can cut in both directions. I held it because I knew that the moment we stopped holding it, we became something different, not animals, despite what the council had decided we were. Just people who had run out of patience and into a corner they had built for us. The council fleet was scared now. I could read it in their command communications. They had come expecting an argument. What they found was an empty corridor and a ship that would not move, and 6 vessels that were simply gone, as if the dark between stars had reached out and quietly decided it needed them more than the fleet did. They did not know where we were. That was the second gift after doubt. The first gift was time to doubt themselves. And GT snorts. And GT. The second gift was not knowing where the danger was. The third gift, in this, was the one that would matter most. The one that would do the deepest work was the understanding slowly arriving in the mind of the fleet's commanding officer that they were not hunting us. They never had been. We were hunting them, and we had been doing it since before they arrived. On the 44th day, I was sitting in a field operations center that had been assembled inside what had been 14 months prior a council contracted mineral survey station on a small, cold moon in the outer reach of the Kepler system. The station was one of 11 that human survey crews had built and operated under council resource development agreements. The agreements had given us access, codes, maintenance authority, and intimate operational knowledge of every structure's layout, every corridor's dimensions, and every weakness in its environmental systems. The council had not thought much about what that meant when they classified us as Tier 4. They had not thought about it the way you do not think about the maintenance worker who fixes your locks, because why would you? He is a maintenance worker. You are the owner. The distinction seems important until the day it does not. We had converted 7 of the 11 stations into operational forward positions in 19 days. Clean, quiet, the kind of logistical movement that looks like nothing from a distance because it is made up of 100 small, unremarkable steps, none of which individually looks like anything at all. I had not slept more than 4 hours at a stretch in 3 weeks. I was not tired, or rather I was tired, the way a person gets tired when they are doing the thing they are built for, the specific bone-deep exhaustion that arrives alongside a clarity so sharp it is almost uncomfortable. I knew where everything was. I knew where every piece of this was going. I could hold the whole shape of it in my mind when I closed my eyes, the way you can hold the shape of a room you know very well in perfect darkness. The fleet was down to one carrier formation. The other two had withdrawn toward Council relay space 6 days ago after the second supply disruption. Not defeated, not destroyed, just redirected, pulled back by the logistics reality that you cannot maintain a combat deployment when your supply chain has developed a habit of not arriving. We had not engaged them in a single direct confrontation. They had never seen us. We had been everywhere around them and nowhere in front of them, which is the oldest tactical principle in human history and the one that the Council's military architects had no framework for, because you cannot prepare for an enemy who refuses to be an enemy in the shape you have prepared for. The remaining carrier formation was holding position near the Kepler station approach zone, waiting, I suspected, for orders that Council command was finding it difficult to formulate because the situation they were in did not match any model in their strategic database. This was when Pryathvas made a mistake. He left the carrier, not in an official capacity, not under escort. He left in a small diplomatic courier vessel with a crew of 4 under what I later learned was a personal authorization code heading toward a set of coordinates that corresponded to a neutral communication relay point in the outer system. I believe he intended to reach out to our command through back channels to open a conversation that his official position made it difficult to open through official means. The problem was that we had been monitoring every vessel movement in the system for 3 weeks. I sent a 2-person retrieval team. They found the courier vessel at the relay point, system's nominal crew uncomfortable but unharmed, and Pryathvas in the vessel's small communications room with the look of a man who has been thinking very hard about what to say when the door opens. The door opened. I was not part of the retrieval team. I met the vessel later at the forward station when it came in under escort. I won't describe what I felt in that moment because I have thought about it many times since, and I want to be honest about it. I had carried Diego's name for 4 years with a specific quality of weight, the kind that does not get lighter because you adjust to it. You just get better at carrying it. It is always there. You reach for things and it is there. You breathe and it is there. I had thought in harder moments about what I would feel when I was in a room with the person who signed the document that made Diego's death a line item in a humanitarian initiative report. What I felt when the door of that courier vessel opened was simpler than I expected. I looked at Pryathvas for 3 seconds. I thought Diego, 22, that laugh in restaurants. Then I put it away. Not because I did not feel it, because there was work to do, and the work was the thing that would actually matter. The thing that would mean something. The anger that came after the 3 seconds was the kind I recognized, the familiar, steady kind that my abuela would have understood, the kind that does not burn hot and fast and waste itself but sits low and even and keeps you warm for a long time. He was sitting in a chair in the vessel's small meeting room when I came in. His neck ridges had gone fully pale. I had not seen a Vethkai that pale in 6 years of posting. His translation earpiece was on the table in front of him. He had removed it, I think, as a gesture and indication that he was here without his official apparatus, without the intermediary layer of institutional language. I picked it up, turned it over in my fingers once, set it down on my side of the table. "You do not need that," I said in old Galactic, the same language he had used in the chamber. "I am going to speak clearly, I am going to speak slowly, and you are going to understand every word." He was silent. "We did not come here to end the council," I said. "We did not come here to take anything that does not belong to us. We came here because you built framework that made our people into resources, and you used that framework, and people are gone because of it. My brother is gone because of it, and the only path through this for both of us is the one where you sit across from me and we discuss what happens next," he said quietly in old Galactic, and his accent was impeccable, which told me he had been listening to my language for longer than he had admitted. What does happen next? I thought about that for a moment. Outside, the cold moon turned slowly under a distant sun. I thought about my abuela in the desert, pointing up at the dark, telling a 7-year-old that the light was always there. "You write down some names," I said, "and then we talk about the future." He wrote down names. He started with Diego's. I watched him write each letter in his own hand in the small notebook I had placed on the table between us. He wrote 13 names that first session. There were more to come. I had a list, but 13 was a start. My hands were steady on the table, both scars showing, both of them mine. The negotiations took 31 days. I want to be honest about those 31 days. They were not simple. They were not clean. There were sessions that ran 14 hours and ended with nothing resolved, and both sides returning to separate rooms with the particular exhaustion that comes from arguing with people who are intelligent enough to understand every point you are making and stubborn enough not to want to act on it. There were moments when the council's secondary delegation, the team that Prithvas had assembled from 4 different member civilizations to provide political cover for whatever agreement we reached, spent 3 hours debating the precise wording of a subclause in a rights framework document that I had read so many times I could have written it backwards. I want to be honest about that because the version of this story that gets told later, the one that will be in whatever historical record the Council and the Earth government eventually agree to publish, will probably be smoother than the truth. The truth had difficult days in it, days when I sat in my quarters at 2:00 in the morning and thought about everything that could still go wrong. I made coffee on those nights, slow, deliberate. The smell of it was the most familiar thing in that station, the most honest thing, the smell of 100 mornings in a life I had built specifically to be able to do something useful with it. I will tell you what the final terms were because they matter. The Tier 4 classification was revoked. Full, that was non-negotiable from our first session, and Prithvas had understood from the beginning that it was. Humanity was reclassified under the Interstellar Sentience Accord as Tier 1. Full and recognized sapience, unrestricted legal personhood, autonomous territorial sovereignty over all Earth origin settlements, and established human operational zones. The harvest licensing framework was dissolved. Every contract issued under its provisions that had applied to human labor or human biological resources was voided. The legal doctrine that had made Diego's posting possible, that had made the language in those 14 uses of the word voluntary possible, was removed from the Council's active framework. Restitution terms were negotiated over 9 days, scaled to documented impact, non-negotiable in the category of the Kepler displacement specifically, where the Council's records were complete and the number of people whose fates were traceable through the initiative's own documentation was precise. There were 104 names on the list I had brought with me, people whose fates the Council's records documented clearly, enough that the trail was undeniable. People who had gone into the Council's systems under the humanitarian initiative and come out as closed files. Each name was entered into the official record of the negotiations. Each name was acknowledged by the Council's delegation as a person, not a closed file, not a Tier 4 incident, a person with a full name and an age and a last known assignment. Diego was first on the list. I had put him first. On the 31st day, in a room that had been set up in the forward station's largest operational bay, our room, our terms, our gravity setting, air that smelled like recycled station atmosphere, and coffee, which was entirely my doing. The final document was prepared for signature. It was 47 pages. I had read every page 11 times. I asked for a pen. The Council's legal officer, a quiet, careful Solon delegate named Veth, who had been the most reasonable person on their team throughout the entire 31 days, looked at me with the particular expression his species used for polite confusion and said, "The signature protocol uses biological authentication. A physical instrument is not." "I am aware," I said. "I would like a pen, an actual pen." There was a pause. Someone found one. A human worker on the station staff produced one from a jacket pocket, a simple black pen, the kind you find in the bottom of every bag and every desk drawer. He handed it to me with a look that said he understood exactly why I had asked for it. I took it. I sat with it in my hand for a moment before I spoke. The room was quiet. Pryathva's was across the table. His neck ridges were no longer pale. He had regained his composure over the course of 31 days. And I respected that. He was not a simple person. He was not stupid, and he was not purely cruel. He was a person who had operated within a system that made certain conclusions easy and certain questions unnecessary, and when the questions became necessary, he had, to his credit, been willing to sit in that room and answer them. That did not balance the scale, but it was a data point. I opened the document to the first page. I said, "Before I sign this, I am entering the following names into the official audio record of this session." No one objected. I read the list, all 104. First name, last name, age at the time of their last documented council, contact, last known assignment. I read them in the order I had organized them, which was not alphabetical and not chronological but personal. Diego first, then the others I had found through years of research, the ones whose families I had spoken to, the ones whose files I had pulled from council administrative archives through the monitoring access I had never stopped using. It took 22 minutes. Nobody moved during those 22 minutes. When I finished, the room was very quiet. I looked at the document in front of me. 47 pages, 3 years of work compressed into language that was precise and cold, and would last if documents like this last for a very long time. I signed it with the pen, pressed it to the biological authentication panel after. Both forms both accepted. I put the pen in the breast pocket of my jacket. The council's legal officer cleared his throat gently and said, "The pen is mine," I said. He nodded. It was. The session closed. The room began to move, the particular organized dispersal of a formal proceeding reaching its end. People gathering documents and communicating in low voices and performing the small administrative rituals that follow large events. I sat still until most of the room had cleared, then stood and straightened my jacket and walked to the door. Veth, the Solon legal officer, was standing near the exit. He had a stillness about him that I had come to read over 31 days as his version of wanting to say something. He communicated in color shifts and the light amber he was currently producing. Along his left forearm was the shade he used when something mattered to him. He said, "I want you to know that I have submitted, independently of this agreement, a formal research petition to the Council's Historical Accuracy Committee regarding the Kepler displacement and 3 other comparable initiatives." I looked at him. "It will probably take years," he said. "The committee is not fast." "I know," I said. "But the record should be complete." "Yes," I said, "it should." I walked out into the corridor. The station's air system hummed at its standard frequency. The overhead lights were the slightly blue-white tint of standard operational lighting on a facility where no one had bothered to warm up the spectrum because there had never been time for that kind of comfort. I walked the full length of the corridor to the observation port at the far end. The Kepler system star was a warm yellow point in the near distance, the kind of star that would have been called sun-like in old Earth astronomy catalogs, the kind that showed up in early search for life surveys as a promising candidate because its light spectrum fell in the range where certain kinds of life tend to happen. Diego had been out here under that star. I stood at the window for a long time. I thought about my abuela in the desert. When I was 7, standing outside a car that would not start in the middle of the night, in the middle of nowhere, pointing up at a sky full of stars and telling me that the light was always there. My eyes just needed time to adjust. I thought about Diego's laugh, the way it turned heads in restaurants. I thought about all the things he would have said about this, about all of this. The improbable, exhausting 31-day negotiation that had just ended in a room on a cold moon where the air smelled like recycled atmosphere and coffee, with a pen in my pocket. He would have said something funny, something so perfectly, precisely funny, that I would have been furious at him for making me laugh at the wrong moment. I did not laugh, but I smiled, small and private, with my forehead almost touching the cold glass of the observation port and the Kepler star burning quietly in the distance. The pen was in my pocket. The names were in the record. The document was signed. We had not waited to be recognized. We had never been waiting for that. We had been waiting to see whether they would make it necessary to prove something, and they had made it necessary, and we had proven it, and now the proof was 47 pages of legal text in a council archive that would exist long after everyone in That room was gone. I breathed. The star burned. I put my hand against the glass, palm. Flat, both scars showing, the one from the fence in El Paso, the one from Diego's pocket knife, and I stayed there until the cold of the viewport moved through my palm and into my wrist and up my arm, and the feeling was sharp and clean and completely, undeniably real. Then I pushed off the glass, turned around, walked back down the corridor toward the operational center, where there was work to do, where there was always work to do, where the next thing was already waiting in the patient way that the next thing always waits. The pen stayed in my pocket. It was going home with me.